Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
this is Gerrymandering 101.
It's a once-in-a-decade fight. We've got a look at the proposed new maps of political power.
I am asking my colleagues to please grow a pair and do the right thing.
Strong words as aldermen debate the right way to create a police misconduct complaint database. Critics call for the mayor's proposal, or they call it smoke and mirrors.
A controversial hedge fund will be the sole owner of the Chicago Tribune. What it could mean for the city's media landscape.
The economy is bouncing back, but for more than 600,000 Cook County residents, food insecurity is expected to remain, keeping local food pantries busy.
As the anniversary of George Floyd's death approaches, members of 3 social justice organizations reflect on the past year and look ahead.
United Airlines launches its own vaccine lottery. That and more from Cranes.
And the rise and recent fall of Bitcoin. Are the dips in value signs of a cryptocurrency bubble? But first, some of today's top stories. Chicago suffers through its deadliest weekend of the year. The Chicago Police Department reports 9 homicides and 36 shootings over the weekend, although the Sun-Times has reported those numbers at 12 and more than 50, respectively. At a news conference this morning, Superintendent David Brown said there are 94 people charged with murder now, released to home confinement on electronic monitoring. Brown points his finger at Cook County judges imposing the bail conditions and away from State's Attorney Kim Foxx. Brown says the judges' decisions are a big risk to public safety.
These people are going back to mostly communities of color who have, in my opinion, the highest victimization rates across this city. So it's a healthy debate, but it's not a Kim Foxx debate. It is judges have decided that these are the outcomes for people who commit violent crime, up to include murder.
Illinois health officials are reporting 933 new cases of the coronavirus today and 10 additional deaths. The state's total case count is 376 million, and 22,633 people have died. And nearly 40% of all adults in Illinois are now vaccinated. St. Sabina pastor Michael Pfleger will be returning to the parish early next month. This after the Archdiocese of Chicago announced today it is reinstating Pfleger to active ministry. Earlier this year, Pfleger was accused of child sexual abuse occurring more than 40 years ago. Today, just before speaking to reporters, he returned to the stairs of St. Sabina and Auburn Gresham to thundering applause from supporters.
I'm so relieved and glad that this nightmare is over. I will continue to pray for the 2 brothers. I promise you that I will return with renewed energy, with a deepened commitment to St. Sabina, to the city of Chicago, and to this community that we serve.
In a letter to parishioners, Cardinal Blaise Cupich says after a thorough review, quote, the review board has concluded that there is insufficient reason to suspect Father Pfleger is guilty of these allegations. Cupich says he's asked Pfleger to take the next 2 weeks to prepare for his return on June 5th. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
All right, thanks, Brandis. Democrats are out with a new map for Illinois. Now, let's make clear, this map isn't any good for navigating on a road trip, but it is a road map to political power. Amanda Vinicky is at the State House in Springfield right now and joins us. Amanda, make sense of this for us.
All right, Paris. Politicians still need to run for office and then actually win a seat if they want to be a voting member of the Illinois House on the floor just behind me or a state senator just across the dome. But the districts in which they run and the constituents who live in those districts have huge influence on who may win those races. And we now have a glimpse at what those new boundaries of political power that will determine power for the next decade in Illinois look like. Illinois Democrats on Friday evening unveiling their drafts of districts for the Illinois House and Senate.
The Democrats use an Etch-a-Sketch to be able to draw these lines. These things don't make sense. This is gerrymandering 101.
GOP not very happy with the results, but they don't have much of a say because Democrats hold super majorities in both chambers of the General Assembly. So Democrats can and did draw the maps themselves. Republicans say that that is obvious, given how many districts pit GOP incumbents against one another and how many district lines dip and curl in order to include more Democratic-leaning populations. State Representative Ryan Spain says the process is rigged.
The only thing that seems to matter are the home addresses of incumbent politicians so that Democrats can be protected and Republicans can be punished.
Now, it's not just the GOP that is complaining. However, you have a bunch of organizations that have been involved in redistricting. So groups like the Better Government Association, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Latino Policy Forum, rejecting these proposed maps. They say that the maps were drawn using outdated, faulty information because the feds haven't yet sent states census data. The decisions by our current lawmakers will disenfranchise tens of thousands of voices for a decade by creating representative maps that do not include them. They say in a statement, how is this equity for Illinois? State Representative Lisa Hernandez chairs the House Redistricting Committee, and she says the criticism is disappointing.
We had like over 45 hearings. Do you understand there was a lot of feedback for community? We had maps of their own. We had all kinds of presentations. There was a lot of information that came in.
Hernandez also says the GOP had an opportunity to give input.
It doesn't surprise me what they're saying because they're looking for a shot at, something to go their way.
Now, community groups are demanding that Governor J.B. Pritzker fulfill his previously and repeated pledges to veto any partisan maps. And the GOP is also putting pressure on the governor.
This is a decision that Governor Pritzker has to make. This is a sad day for democracy, but he has a role to play in this. If he allows this process to go forward and signs a map that was made in such a flawed way and in such a partisan way, then he's contributing to this downfall of people's faith in the way that our process works.
The governor is in Springfield, but he had no public events. His office releasing a non-committal statement saying the governor looks forward to reviewing the maps the General Assembly sends to his desk and is also looking forward to hearing input from community members and advocates during the legislative hearings taking place this week. And we have 4 of those hearings, the first pair of which begins tomorrow afternoon. Paris, back to you.
All right, Amanda, just the beginning of a tug of war on that. And now to Brandis for a look at efforts behind a proposed database of police misconduct complaints. Brandis.
Yeah, Paris, a plan to create that database of police misconduct complaints backed by Mayor Lightfoot stalled in a city council hearing earlier today. Critics of the proposal say it would drastically limit the number of complaints included and fall far short of full transparency. Those critics include the city's inspector general, and some aldermen agreed with him.
That, to me, is a reason for me to say we're not done yet. Because if OIG is not on board and they're the ones that have to implement this thing, then shame on us.
The OIG just simply makes a recommendation. And we as council members, it's on us and it's our responsibility to either enact it or not enact it. And with his recommendation in this case, I certainly disagree with him.
WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. So Heather, there's been some debate over how far back this database of complaints should go, what should be included. Where does the latest version of this plan stand?
Would include complaints going back to the year 2000. Now, originally, Joe Ferguson, the city's watchdog, wanted it to go back to 1994, but that is literally tens of thousands of complaints, if not hundreds of thousands of complaints, so it was scaled back. The bigger debate is what kind of complaint should be in that database. The Inspector General said he feared that it wouldn't include enough, while aldermen said they wanted to make it manageable and reasonable, both in terms of scope and price.
And the measure did not get a vote in today's hearing. Any idea what's next?
Well, Alderman Scott Wagsback, who is the chairman of the Finance Committee, who's really been shepherding this through, said he would go back to the drawing board and try to negotiate a compromise with Inspector General Joe Ferguson. But that, I think, is a long shot because the two sides are very far apart on what should be included in this database. And there are a number of aldermen who don't think it's worth the expense at all, giving them a very narrow path to walk to legislative success, despite the support of Mayor Lightfoot.
Okay, more to come on this or not. Heather Sharon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And now back to Paris and the latest on big news for Chicago journalism. Paris.
That's right, Brandis. Alden Global Capital is set to be the new owner of the Chicago Tribune. Shareholders of the Tribune and other affiliate papers voted last week on a takeover bid by the controversial hedge fund in a deal worth roughly $630 million. Many in and out of the journalism industry had hoped this deal could be avoided, saying that it could cripple the Chicago Tribune. And joining us to answer that and more are David Jackson, a senior investigative reporter at the Better Government Association. Jackson is also a former Tribune reporter. And Charles Whitaker, dean and professor at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. We reached out to Alden Global Capital for comment, but have not received a response. We do thank the two of you for being back here. First, David Jackson, Friday was the day that you and your former colleagues had hoped to avoid. You had warned against this takeover bid from Alden Global Capital. Now that it's done, what does this mean for the short and long term, the Chicago Tribune?
Well, it's really, Paris, a question about what it means for our city and for the other cities that have had these great Tribune publishing newsrooms standing up for their communities. And in my opinion, this is the question is, what does this mean for American democracy? What do we lose when we lose local and regional newspapers? And I think on all of those counts, Alden's triumph is the community's loss.
Charles Whitaker, is it a fait accompli that Alden, now fully in control of the company, will just slash to the bone and diminish resources? I'm sorry, Charles, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
If history is any indication, yes, I think that is true. Their pattern is to go in and maximize profits, and that means cutting everything to the bone so that you can squeeze as much profit as possible out of the product.
And that is sort of consistent with the other papers that they have owned for the last several years. Let's hear from Chicago Tribune reporter and union president over there, Greg Pratt, about his fears of this takeover.
Alden Global Capital often talks about how they care about sustainable futures for journalism and news, but there isn't a ton of evidence to support that. They've got a horrible track record on that, and you have to take people for what they do, not for what they say.
David Jackson, you and your former colleague Gary Marks tried feverishly to find deep-pocketed investors, civic leaders that would mount a competing takeover bid. Now that Alden has finished its deal, does that mean there is no hope for any other bid? Say a civic leader wants to come forward now and offer Alden more than that $630 million.
I am not at the deal table, Paris, but I would say emphatically that the window is closed for that type of negotiation. We looked beyond deep-pocketed and wealthy investors. We looked at and talked to the philanthropies in Chicago and to many in the journalism community here and various community organizations to try to see what could be knit together. And at the end of the day, this apparently was something in which the city leaders simply, and when I say leaders, I mean the nonprofit and business and civic leaders couldn't step up to do.
Charles Whitaker, is this the only way out for newspapers to beg deep-pocketed folks, billionaires or philanthropic folks to come in and rescue the newspaper?
I don't think relying on benevolent billionaires and the philanthropic community is the way out. Unfortunately, it looks like the only way out now because that's the only model that we have that seems to be working. But it's been very, very clear that the philanthropic community does not want to be on the hook for propping up these publications in perpetuity. Billionaires ultimately want to make money. And so we're going to have to look for alternative business models to support journalism going forward.
And David Jackson, you know, we had talked about in the past on this program some of the philanthropic leaders that were in high-level discussions. You spoke to many philanthropic folks, civic leaders. What was the reasoning that you gleaned that they did not want to dip their toe in any of this?
Well, the Chicago Tribune had been damaged by a series of greedy and boneheaded corporate directors over several years, and obviously had lost its foreign bureaus, its national bureaus, its Washington bureaus. And so when you sat down to look at the books today and see how could you revive an ambitious, mission-driven, civic-minded journalism enterprise from what was left, it was tough, and that's the reality. I really think Charles is exactly right. However, the future is not wealthy or deep-pocketed investors. The future is readers and subscribers who see value in the work journalism does and are willing to pay a little bit to get that journalism in their homes or on their screens every day. I think that's really where the fight turns now for all the mosaic of nonprofit newsrooms in Chicago and the other very important legacy newsrooms in our city.
And this newsroom, we should, you know, full disclosure, is a nonprofit newsroom. We've seen some success, Charles Whitaker, of that new model, at least on the hyper-local level with publications like Block Club. But do you see that model backing a legacy institution like the Chicago Tribune? Can something come in and fill that void?
No, I mean, even the hyperlocal model is successful for now, but again, it's still being propped up by philanthropy. It's not actually a model that's built on consumers actually paying what it costs to produce, or a larger fraction of what it costs to produce journalism. And no, that's not a model that will sort of sustain legacy publications like the Chicago Tribune. We are going to have a multi-pronged business model that relies on some subscribers, maybe a little bit vestiges of advertising, maybe events, but we have to rethink what the model for journalism is. And as David said, we've got to convince the public that this is something that's worth paying for. We've done a terrible job convincing the public that journalism is something that's important, that should be maintained. Everyone sort of thinks it's like air and that it should be free. We've got to change that mindset in order to keep journalism thriving.
And David Jackson, a way to do that is to just simply produce great journalism, enterprise stories, and make people realize how essential that is. But do you see this ecosystem in Chicago now as just a patchwork of nonprofits like yours, the Better Government Association, hyperlocal, and some dying legacy outlets, or can anything fill the void here?
Well, when you went back 10 or 15 years ago, Paris, to the Chicago Tribune of the aughts, you saw a civic mission nested in a for-profit company. The newsroom that I became a part of was really basically a group of very idealistic, very committed, passionate journalists who happened to work for a company that was also making, at that time, compared to Alden, a modest profit. And I think that that spirit has never been lost in Chicago. This is a city of kick-butt investigative journalism, of hardcore community journalism that's going back over decades from Studs Terkel forward. And you see that spirit in Block Club Chicago, in many of the other nonprofit outlets. And frankly, I think that it's not my generation that will figure this out. I think it's the next gen coming up.
The coming generation, and obviously so many reporters at the Tribune over the years that have left to go on to other places like yourself. They're still here in Chicago, still doing great work, and we'll have to leave it there. Our thanks to Charles Whitaker and David Jackson.
Thanks, Bert.
And up next, we check in with local food pantries to hear why they believe food insecurity is expected to remain. So please stay with us.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. What do you believe prevents a strong coalition of Black and Latino communities forming across the communities?
I want us to, as a nation, to find a way to come together.
Go down the block, get it from someone local, and keep the money in the community.
Black joy and the Black experience is magical.
The Greater Chicago Food Depository, which supplies food pantries across the city, says in its more than 40-year history, it has never seen a hunger crisis like the one caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The situation may be easing somewhat as the economy bounces back, but it is estimated that more than 600,000 residents of Cook County, or roughly 12%, will struggle this year to meet the most basic of needs, food. Tonight, as part of our Firsthand Living in Poverty series, we take a look at the pandemic's impact on food insecurity. Joining us now with more are Gregory Gross, Executive Director at Care for Real, which runs food pantries in Rogers Park, Edgewater, and beyond. Nicole Robinson, who is the Chief Partnerships and Programs Officer at the Greater Chicago Food Depository. And Eric Clark, Director of the Sheldon Heights Food Pantry, which provides services to residents of Roseland and West Pullman. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Nicole Robinson, let's start with you, please. Give us a sense of the level of need out there.
Brandis, thanks for prioritizing this as a topic. And you were spot on when you talked about the 600,000 people and 12% of our service area who are coping with food insecurity. I'd add that many of these individuals and families were coping with food insecurity before the pandemic. 38% of Black families with children in the household, 28% with Latino children in the household, and 17% of white households face food insecurity today. We are doing our best, and I'm glad I'm joined here by both Gregory and Eric, who are on the ground helping connect people to food, but it is unprecedented. At the peak of the pandemic, food pantries like the ones that Gregory and Eric run saw anywhere in the neighborhood of 150% increase in the number of people who were showing up. We've seen that decline over the coming months, and we've seen lots of federal relief come into the city, rental subsidies and other supports, but it is still well above pre-pandemic levels.
And we'll get to the impact of some of those supports that you mentioned if they should begin to go away as the economy begins to bounce back. But Gregory Gross, of course, the pandemic caused the need to increase, as we've heard. How would you describe the demand for your services today?
Well, I was just looking at numbers. As Nicole was saying, we saw a 143% increase in first-time guests to the food pantry in 2020. In the first quarter of this year, we saw a 57% increase over the same time period in 2020. And just looking at last week, we've had the most guests to our food pantries than we have since January of this year. So like Nicole says, the need isn't going anywhere. We started a second day at our Rogers Park pantry last week, and 95% of the folks who came were the first time coming to our food pantry. So the need exists. It's a matter of trying to reach everyone who is experiencing food insecurity.
And to that end, Eric Clark, are you all able to meet all of the demand that you're experiencing?
Yes, so far we are. With the help of the Greater Chicago Food Depository, we have been able to make sure those individuals, the clients that are coming to our pantry, are able to pick up the food that they desperately need. Those are our previous clients and all of the ones that Gregory even mentioned, all of the new clients. And that's what I'm most thankful for is, as he mentioned, every week our pantries open on Tuesdays, twice 10 to 12 and then 4 to 6. We are averaging probably 10 to 15 new clients every Tuesday in both sessions. And so it just goes to show you that week after week, there are still new individuals who are working their way into that system where they're looking for the food that their family needs.
Nicole Robinson, how important are donations in order for folks like you and our other guests to be able to meet that need? And have those donations fluctuated over the course of this pandemic?
Brandis, you are right. The donations are absolutely needed because the work that Eric and Gregory do each day, it's invaluable. They are heroes. I would call them superheroes, actually, because the donations, we need donations for food. But Gregory and Eric both use volunteers to support their work. We've done a great job. We invested about $5 million since the beginning of the pandemic to basically support pantries with anything they need. If they needed additional cold storage to store more fruits and vegetables and dairy items, because they can only distribute so much food as they can store. So how can we get them that? How can we just give them general operating support to hire more staff members, to have stipends and lunches for volunteers? There's so many things that go into making a food pantry operate efficiently. We've been doing the best we can, and the donations go a long way towards that kind of support.
Nicole, is the summer typically a tougher month for those kinds of, or typically a tougher season for those kinds of donations?
We typically do see a decline. I think one of the silver linings in this pandemic is that awareness for food insecurity. I always say that there was a silent pandemic before COVID-19, right? There were hundreds of thousands of people who were food insecure, and Gregory and Eric were serving those people, right? But they were largely ignored by the rest of the world. What the pandemic has done is raised awareness for the fact that there are people coping with poverty, and inconsistent access to food is a part of their everyday reality. It had become normal. What I feel like now is we're at this moment where people are saying, hey, that reality is unacceptable. And people are willing to step up and help. Donations are a part of stepping up to do that work. The summer in particular, kids are out of school. We're all happy that our city is opening up and we can do more. What that means is we're gonna have hundreds of thousands of kids across Cook County out in the community in summer. They may be in a community program, they may not, but that's a large population that is part of our responsibility to make sure they're connected to food. And we're trying to figure out how we do that during a pandemic. So people, as we go back to normal, I want everyone to understand that there are families who are food insecure that continue to need us.
And I wanted to jump in and get Eric in here a little bit more. Eric, have you seen a significant change in the people who are now relying on your service?
I would say I don't necessarily see them as different, but I would see them as just individuals who are in need. And I think one of the major turning points in just the overall awareness of the need for food was when every night we all saw those videos of, people in cars in long lines waiting for food. I think television does a great job, pictures do a great job of helping convey, the importance and the serious need of individuals. And if you think back to when the pandemic first started, how often did we see those long lines? How often did we see people, waiting hours just to get food? And I think that was a major turning point because people actually thought about others. They realized how important it was to help their neighbor because our neighbors were getting sick. Our neighbors were losing their jobs. And so I think it became very real, right? Then when you have somebody that's close to you, someone that that, is about to start that sort of a struggle.
Obviously, yeah, that brings it home. That's unfortunately where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to the three of you for the work that you do and for joining us, Nicole Robinson, Gregory Gross, and Eric Clark. McDonald's hopes to reopen its dining rooms by the summer, but some franchisees are not happy with the idea. That and more from Cranes. We hear from two state lawmakers as the Illinois legislature is set to wrap up its business a week from today. As we near the one-year anniversary of George Floyd's death, Members of 3 social justice organizations reflect on the past year and what they want to see moving forward. And the rise and recent fall of Bitcoin. Are the dips in value signs of a cryptocurrency bubble? But first, some more of today's top stories. Illinois' higher education and workforce systems are failing black students. That is the takeaway from a new report released today from the Equity Working Group. The group of educators, policymakers, employers, and advocates created the report, which found that only half of the state's black high school graduates will enroll in a college or university. Of them, only 36% will graduate, and they say even fewer will secure a job that pays a living wage. The Equity Working Group also says college enrollment for black students fell nearly 30% between 2013 and 2018, and makes recommendations around college accessibility and affordability, as well as providing more institutional supports for black students.
As we look towards the elimination of the racial wealth gap, as we look towards the removal of barriers to education and to addressing institutional racism, we know that education is one of the most important tools that we can use to do that work.
Illinois health officials are reporting 933 new cases of the coronavirus today and 10 additional deaths. And the state's test positivity rate is at 2.7%. And now to Paris for some of today's top business stories. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. United Airlines launches its own vaccine lottery. McDonald's says it's planning to fully reopen its dining rooms, but not without some pushback. And in Chicago area real estate, the asking price is only a suggestion now. Here to go behind the headlines is Crane Chicago business editor Ann Dwyer. Ann, a lot to get to here. So starting with Chicago-based United, it's announcing its own lotteries to encourage people to get the COVID-19 vaccine shots. So what would the winners get?
The winners would get what United is calling a year of free travel. That would equate to about 26 round-trip flights for 5 winners out of this lottery. Now, to qualify, you have to upload proof that you're vaccinated by June 22nd. Now, if you're going to rush to your computer and make that happen, be aware that if you don't win the grand prize, those 5 full-year tickets, they'll also be giving away round-trip tickets for 2 to another 30 winners. But really all this underscores, Paris, is just how desperate United and the other airlines are to make sure that the majority of the flying public is vaccinated. They really want to get back to normal as quickly as possible.
And I won't tell you whether or not I'm going to go run to my computer after this and enter that lottery. All right, let's talk about another big Chicago company, McDonald's, announcing plans to reopen dining rooms, but some franchisees are pushing back. How come?
Well, they claim that they don't have enough staff, nor do they have enough demand, really, for in-person dining to justify the expense right now. In fact, a lot of franchisees are saying, you know, we're doing just fine, thank you very much, with drive-through and delivery and takeout, which, of course, all can be operated with fewer staffers and therefore at less expense. And what the franchisees say matters to McDonald's corporate, because here in the U.S. anyway, franchisees control about 95% of the 14,000 McDonald's restaurants nationwide. Now, the company says it is going to work with individual owners to try to come up with alternative plans as necessary, but it's pretty clear that HQ wants to see restaurants fully reopened again. It'll be an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, interesting tug of war. It might end up being a patchwork depending on the franchisee. All right. The Chicago housing market, it is on a hot streak right now. I'm hearing this, you're hearing this, neighbors, real estate people saying that that sales are going above asking price. How much above, and how long is this going to last?
Well, it depends in part, Paris, on which neighborhood you're talking about. But overall, on average, houses in Chicago sold for slightly more than 100% of the asking price in April. And our real estate reporters tell me that that is almost unheard of, an above 100% average asking price. Now, in some neighborhoods, the gap between the asking price and the selling price is actually bigger than that. I'm talking about Avondale, in Greater Grand Crossing, and in Auburn Gresham, the average price for a house sold was about 107% of the asking price in those neighborhoods. Now, I should note that the data that Crane's analyzed here, Paris, is just for single family homes. But that isn't to say the condo and townhouse market isn't torrid too. In April, those units sold for about 98% of the asking price in the city.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of stories like that from neighbors in my building and real estate agents throughout. All right, and we'll see how long this seller's market keeps up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it's the home stretch for the Illinois legislature, set to wrap up its business a week from today. We check back in with Amanda Vinicky, who joins us now with a pair of legislators from the state capitol. Amanda.
Yes, Paris, I'm going to begin with a Republican. Senator Jason Plummer is from Edwardsville, and you're also on the redistricting committee. So we've seen now a first draft, at least, of the potential maps for the next decade. What are your thoughts?
Well, the maps are troubling because we've seen the maps, but we haven't seen the data that they use to design the maps. And, you know, I'm on all the redistricting committees, and we've heard from the people that they want to have input and they want it to be a transparent process, and it hasn't been so far.
Is this a lost cause, a done deal?
No, it's not a lost cause. You know, Governor Pritzker committed to the people of Illinois when he was asking for their vote to veto any map that was a partisan map. Well, here's his opportunity to veto a partisan map, and we hope that he's a man of his word.
What else needs to get done before the end of the legislative session?
Well, the Senate Republicans would like to see a robust ethics package, an anti-corruption package be passed here in Springfield. Obviously, that's an issue, and the voters care about it, and we think there's a real opportunity to make progress here.
Corruption in Illinois? What are you talking about? What has to be part of that package in order to change the culture?
Well, I think we need to make it easier to investigate corruption. In Illinois, it's a pretty difficult process. I think there should also be things like bans on legislators transitioning into lobbying and things of that nature. So there's a lot of areas we could go into, but the fact of the matter is we've been here for months. We haven't moved a package yet, and that's troubling with only a few days left in session.
Do you have faith that something is going to happen? I mean, again, corruption, I was a bit jesting, but certainly in the headlines.
Yeah, it's an issue voters care about, and the fact that the legislators aren't moving it right now show a disrespect for the people of Illinois. It's a problem. We have an opportunity to address it. Let's see if we get it done this final week.
And now the budget, one of the central arguments is whether what some say are corporate tax loopholes will be closed. Is that what you consider them? And if not, how do you make up a $1.3 billion deficit?
Well, I think right now the governor's office is playing games with what a deficit potentially looks like. The numbers have been changing all year. The fact of the matter is we're coming out of an economic crisis right now. The last thing we can do is raise taxes on small businesses that generate most of the jobs in Illinois.
And what about all of the federal money that Illinois is going to be receiving for this COVID relief? How do you want that to be spent? I know there are limitations, of course.
There are limitations, but I want to see that that money spent in a way that doesn't create new programs. We have a real fiscal crisis in Illinois. We've had one for many years. It's not pandemic driven. And so we need to use that money to try to strengthen the fiscal condition of the state, not create new programs.
And thank you very much. We're going to give you an opportunity to sort of pass the baton, the microphone, and bring in a Democrat that is going to be one of the leaders here in the House, and that is Jahan Gordon Booth. She is from Peoria. We appreciate your joining us on Chicago Tonight. You just heard what Senator Plummer had to say there, so let's kind of work backwards.
Yes.
The budget. We know what it's like to not get one passed. Are we going to have a budget in Illinois in time, and what do you believe will be the central components of it?
Without question, we're going to have a budget this year. The only time that we have not had a budget was we were under the leadership of the former governor. I believe that the budget priorities this year are going to focus on the things that we know are important to everyday Illinoisans. That's ensuring that we have an education formula that's properly funded, ensuring that we are making investments in communities and in people. We know that in Illinois, our biggest asset is our people, and so investing in those things, ensuring that we have some of the very strong tax credits that create and spawn jobs and opportunities in the state, like the Edge tax credit, the River's Edge tax credit, having those kinds of opportunities that allow private dollars to be leveraged to build out our communities across the state is really important.
What about filling that hole, that $1.3 billion?
Listen, that's still a part of the process. When I leave here, I'm going back to another budget meeting. We're still working on.
Still tonight, huh?
Still tonight. I mean, but you know, you've been around here for a while. We typically are bringing the budget out here late, on Monday.
What's on the agenda for tonight's meeting?
How we're going to fill that hole.
Any ideas there? Can you clue us in?
You know what? I think a lot of this really boils down to what is in the will of the legislature, right? What can we get the votes to support? And so we've been having conversations with Democrats and Republicans centered around what are the priorities of this entire body, not just our caucus, so that we are bringing forward the best possible package.
One of those priorities for Republicans, but also a lot of reform groups constantly say, where is ethics? How is something not moving on that? So is there going to be a plan? And again, what will be in it? Because there's a lot of ideas thrown about, but we don't know what actually could pass muster.
Yeah, so Senator Plummer spoke to it. I think that Speaker Welch has made the ethics his cornerstone in terms of how he's been communicating to us as a caucus about the absolute importance of bringing forth an ethics package. I think that there were some members of both caucuses, of both sides of the aisle, that brought up some of the issues that they had. We're talking about things in the weeds, and it's important that we get the details right. Some of the things that have come up before now, that before the pandemic came up, and some of those issues gave concern centered around equity. Right? Because anytime we're talking about making wholesale change, we also have to think about those unintended consequences. And so making sure that whatever we pass, that we are sure that the unintended consequences are ones that we can live with.
And thank you. I'm afraid we will have to leave it there, but we look forward to having you back, as well as, of course, Senator Plummer. Much appreciation. Tossing it back to you guys in the studio.
Right, Amanda, a lot to get to in just 7 days, and I know you'll be down there giving us a blow-by-blow of all of it. And up next, social justice organizations reflect on the past year. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Nearly a year ago, the world watched that pivotal video of George Floyd gasping for air under the knee of former police officer Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis. Floyd's death sent a nation of people in quarantine out into the streets in mass protests across the country. Major corporations issued statements in support of Black Lives Matter, and politicians promised a new direction. A year later, some activists might argue there is more work to be done to reach equity and social justice for Black and brown people. On Sunday's Chicago Tonight Black Voices, we spoke with members from 3 social justice organizations. I began by asking whether they saw increased interest and engagement once those protests began.
I think that the past year, has felt like the work that we've always been doing, that we've been doing for a very long time. But it felt like that work was amplified. There was a groundswell of, not only engagement, but like we really felt like people's rage. And so there were lots of new folks engaging with our organization, as well as organizations all across the city and all across the country that have been really struggling to get this message around police violence out for a very long time.
A year later, would you say that interest is still there?
You know what? The reality is, we're in a pandemic. So folks are at home, they're off work, they're expected to be sheltering in place, and they're faced with this traumatic event. So there was absolutely way more folks than we had ever seen plugging in right now. Are all of them there? No, because capitalism is forcing people to go back to work and pushing people to go back to school. So we understand that people have life barriers where they can't take the streets and sustain that kind of movement, but there are lots more folks who are not only engaging in this work, but there are people talking about it. There are folks putting pressure on their elected officials to really shrink the footprint of police in our communities. So just really proud of how people showed up and are continuing to show up in real power.
Aisha Butler, what do you find, or what did you find the protest revealed about your own community of Inglewood, but also others in Chicago?
Every time I think about, I go back to the civil unrest day, that Sunday. And I unfortunately had to witness looting from my porch for about 72 hours. Something that I have never seen in my life up close. Something that hit my stomach like I was at a funeral of a loved one. What I felt was that moment showed me how economically starved and empty our community was. I mean, it's a dollar store that is the primary, source of looting, a dollar store. And so I think for me, it exposed a lot, but that was just a moment that I saw that I was like, as Tanya talked about this capitalistic environment, it was truly the consumers really getting back at this capitalistic environment who have been robbed economically for decades. And I just saw that burst out into the rage we saw on the street.
Todd Belcourt, sorry, go ahead, Aisha.
No, that was it.
Todd Belcourt, you say your organization, Social Change, you all had a role in getting some police reforms passed. Tell us about HB 3653, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the executive directors made the context and the history and the moment we're in really clear. We reside in America, a place where in our founding documents it says all men are created equal. We sing a song that says land of the free. We pledge allegiance to liberty and justice for all. But at the end of the day, there are millions of people who are living in terror, not in terror because of the pandemic or because of Hezbollah or Hamas, in terror because of the very people that we pay to serve and protect us. And I think the world was on hold, and because of the pandemic, and the entire world watched as George Floyd cried out for his mother. And I think that just basic semblance and just call out for our basic humanity has been a clarion call that we've been used to organize and get people who may have been on the fence or otherwise disinclined to engage in police reform work to come to the table and do something meaningful, to do something better than what we've been doing historically. As a result, we were able to get some legislation moved in Illinois that was signed by the governor that would revolutionize how police are to consider what's an actual threat, to revolutionize how police are to consider how to actually engage our communities to ensure that dignity and preserving life is at the absolute forefront. And to also make sure that when people are telling their stories or when they're in these very critical and vulnerable moments, that police honestly represent what took place on paper. They don't lie on police reports, so we can actually get access to their conduct files much longer. That their body cams, there's duty of care to ensure that they're looking after the body cams, and if anything is to go awry, that they're to notify someone immediately, just to instill some basic accountability and some basic transparency into this institution that has been known for terrorizing the community for generations.
Tanya, how do you sustain the engagement in social justice movements a year later and going forward?
You know what? I think that we have to continue to talk about this in communities. It is not enough. And it actually, we shouldn't live in a society where we just respond to traumatic Black death, on TV or social media. We have to have these conversations every day. We have to organize in our communities. We have to really engage folks around reimagining safety and justice for all of us. I actually want to live in a world where people don't have to turn up when the police murder a Black man, right? I want to live in a world where we don't have to think about police ever murdering a Black man or a Black woman or a brown young little baby boy. We shouldn't have to consider that these are even societal issues that we have to face. So, having conversations about building and reimagining and redelivering real safety and justice in communities is key right now and from this moment on.
Again, that was a portion of a conversation from Sunday's Chicago Tonight Black Voices. You can watch that full interview on our website. And be sure to join us tomorrow for a Chicago Tonight special on the anniversary of George Floyd's death. We'll spend the hour looking at policing in Chicago with community members, police officers, and more. That's tomorrow at 7. Now, Paris, we go back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Has the Bitcoin bubble finally burst? While the digital coin's value soared to an all-time high of nearly $65,000 per Bitcoin a month ago, last week saw a dramatic one-day 30% drop to $30,000. The past 24 hours have been kinder for Bitcoin holders, with the cryptocurrency gaining thousands in value, but concerns over the volatility of this relatively new form of currency remain. And joining us to provide his analysis on the situation is Jimmy Odom, co-founding partner of Bit Capital Group, one of the first blockchain security mining and management companies. Jimmy Odom, welcome to Chicago Tonight. And every time we talk about this, we do have to do the quick primer. Just remind our viewers, what is Bitcoin? I mean, it's the most famous cryptocurrency. And then what is blockchain? Blockchain.
Great question.
Blockchain.
So what is blockchain? What is blockchain? The simplest way to think about it is the Blockchain is a grouping of receipts of transactions. So think just going to Walmart, you've got a receipt of transactions that you bought something in exchange for something, a dollar or some money. And then you tied everyone in the world's receipt from Walmart together. That is a chain of receipts, right? Blockchain is just doing that digitally. That's the simplest way to think about it. There's a grouping of receipts that have been tied together. And so what Bitcoin is, what is Bitcoin? It's so, for me, it's so philosophical. So I know that it's not going to be helpful for the audience to really go into that esoteric.
Blockchain is helpful, and we'll just leave it at it's the most famous cryptocurrency. All right,
No,
so we saw that.
Yeah, that's fine.
We saw that it's
so much more than that.
Obviously,
so much more than that.
It recovered today. It dropped from its high of 65,000. It's now hovering around 38,000. What would you say caused that precipitous drop?
Yeah, I mean, what you have in Bitcoin are a few factors that really impact the way in which external systems view it. And what I mean is the value of Bitcoin is not derived from external individuals or entity placing assignment of value there. That's first thing. But I would say that a few news cycle events cause there to be external pressure against, what people saw as the value of the future of Bitcoin. There were a lot of FUD, what we call FUD in the crypto industry. It means fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There was a lot of FUD tossed around China cracking down on Bitcoin miners. 60% of the world's hash rate is in China. And so if China was going to then take effort to lock down a bunch of miners, that could have a disastrous impact on the way in which...
And just to be clear, China is basically heavily restricting the use of Bitcoin in blockchain mining, correct?
I'm sensitive to answer that in the affirmative or the denial. And reason being is there's a lot more nuance than that. What I would say is probably happening is China is beginning to take the stage to deploy their digital yuan. So the digital yuan is going to what Bitcoin is, I would think that from China's viewpoint was a testing ground to see what could be done with a digital currency. And now that they've got a ton of market data or beta data, now they're saying, okay, the digital yuan is ready. Now we want to start to reduce the competition. And that's
so they might have their own cryptocurrency that they want to control there. Hold
on. There's no might. They do. It's already being piloted in many provinces in China. So there's no question that this is a real thing.
Something definitely to watch. And what about the environmental footprint? I mean, that was the case Elon Musk made for sort of pulling back on Bitcoin, that mining Bitcoin is going to have a humongous environmental footprint. Remind us why.
Well, I think that it's really disingenuous of someone like Elon to speak out in that manner against this industry in this way, particularly and predominantly because he and his business are surrounding themselves around government subsidies, right? And so the levy against the carbon footprint or carbon tax against anyone that is Tesla, I think is clear. That's for anyone that's understanding the value of what he's saying. But if we're going to assess the energy consumption of a network, then it's important and probably fair to analyze the footprint of every industry, whether it be Visa, MasterCard. What about refrigerators that are consuming more dormant energy than any other industry sector that Bitcoin could create? And so you've got to be conscientious on what they are saying and what their incentives are. And that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin. All incentives are laid bare before the network. And for those that are speaking, oh, Bitcoin's consuming X amount of energy, well, is that the most egregious consumptor? No. It's so many other industries that we could tap first to have that conversation. That's why I think it's very disingenuous for anyone that starts to talk about the ecological impact of that is Bitcoin. It's just not a fair statement. And it's clearly they have incentive to do so.
But still, a lot of folks do raise concerns about that aspect of Bitcoin. So, all right, let me ask you then, this dip, are you not concerned about this for the long run? Are you still pretty bullish on investing in Bitcoin?
Not at all. Everything that I own is in this industry. My assets, my businesses. I don't own a home, but I own mining farms, right? I own my facilities outright. And that's just giving you context. the way that I and many in my industry see this is we are not measuring the success of Bitcoin against the dollar or the yuan, right? We don't measure that. It's the internal network usage. You can only use Bitcoin to facilitate transactions within Bitcoin, and that is where the strength lies. If I were to tell you that Bitcoin is the largest supercomputer on the planet, you would probably have no clue what I'm coming from and what I would be discussing. But that is a truth. It is a fundamental fact. And so if I wanted to use the global computer, the largest supercomputer on Earth, I would have to use the language in which that computer operates, and that would be Bitcoin. So what is that worth? What is that value? It's not translative to US dollars. It has a complete, segmentary value outside of what most are looking at it as.
All right, Jimmy Odom, we'll have to have you on again to further demystify this for our viewers. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that is our show for this Monday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A 1-hour Chicago Tonight special on the anniversary of George Floyd's killing. We take a look at policing in Chicago with community members, police officers, and more.
And you can join me in just a few minutes for our special Chicago Tonight Voices community conversation. We're talking with community and thought leaders about the impact of Floyd's death, both locally and nationally. Again, that's tonight at 8. Visit WTTW.com/voices to RSVP. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm serving Chicago for 37 years.